Step back in time to the height of the Cold War, a tense period of geopolitical rivalry between the world's two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The echoes of World War II had barely faded when Europe found itself divided, with an Iron Curtain metaphorically descending to separate the East from the West. Here in the Eastern Bloc, countries were not just under the influence, but under the iron-fisted control of the Soviet Union. This was a time when political and civil liberties were often seen as secondary to the grand narrative of the Cold War. Eastern Bloc nations, like pawns on a chessboard, found themselves having to suppress their own aspirations of freedom, their own dreams of democracy. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, in a small country known as Czechoslovakia, a remarkable event was about to unfold, one that would come to be known as the Prague Spring. In the early months of 1968, the winds of change began to blow in Czechoslovakia. The country, under the tight grip of Soviet control, saw a glimmer of hope in the form of a man named Alexander Dubček. As the newly elected first secretary of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, Dubček was a breath of fresh air. He was not just another Soviet puppet, but a man who dared to dream of a different path for his country. Dubček's vision was one of socialism with a human face. He didn't seek to overthrow the communist regime, but rather to reform it. He believed in a system that maintained socialist principles but also respected basic human rights, a system that allowed for political liberalization and a loosening of censorship. Dubček championed the cause of greater rights for citizens, and for a while it seemed as if his dream might become a reality. The Czechoslovaks embraced these changes with open arms. The atmosphere was charged with optimism, and people began to hope for a better future. But this optimism did not sit well with the other Eastern Bloc countries. They saw it as a threat to their own authority and a potential disruption of the Soviet Union's ironclad control over the Eastern Bloc. The Soviet Union, along with its Warsaw Pact allies, watched the unfolding events in Czechoslovakia with growing apprehension. They saw Dubček's reforms not as a harmless experiment in socialism, but as a dangerous precedent that could inspire similar movements in their own territories. The fear of losing control was too great, and so in August 1968, they decided to act. The Warsaw Pact forces invaded Czechoslovakia, their tanks rolling down the streets of Prague. The invasion was swift and brutal, effectively putting an end to the Prague Spring. The dreams of political liberalization and increased rights for citizens were crushed under the treads of Soviet tanks. In just a few short months, the Prague Spring had blossomed and then been brutally crushed. The Prague Spring was a brief period of freedom and hope, but its impact would resonate far beyond its abrupt end. Its aftermath saw the return to stringent communist rule, a period ironically referred to as normalization. Yet, even in the face of such oppression, the spirit of the Prague Spring refused to be quelled. It became a symbol of potential freedom, a light in the dark for the people of Czechoslovakia and for others under the Soviet yoke. This beacon of hope inspired future movements for freedom and democracy across Eastern Europe. One such movement was the Velvet Revolution, a non-violent transition of power that would finally end the communist rule in Czechoslovakia over 2 decades after the Prague Spring. Though the Prague Spring was short-lived, it left a lasting legacy of defiance and a beacon of hope, echoing the saying, "For a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes." To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction.